how's it going? So today we're going to be looking at episode 6 of season 2 of House of the Dragon. Okay, so to start off with, we got a scene of the Lannister forces who were referenced in the last episode, and first time we're seeing them all out in their full armour, their full gear, the heraldry is out, they have lions, the whole nine, and they're pulling up to the Golden Tooth. The Golden Tooth is the seat of House Lefer. They reside here with Lord Humphrey Lefer, who Jason Lannister is talking to. And it is notable, we see there that they have their heraldry as well as they come out to meet with the Lannister forces. So their sigil is a gold inverted pile on sky blue with a yellow sun in the first. We don't actually get to see the yellow sun in the first here just because they're vertically placed banners. We're going to have a little sigil session as usual. So the gold inverted pile, gold traditionally symbolises wisdom, consistency, glory and generosity in heraldry, which is going to be very interesting to see because we're going to have to see how generous they are with their new army that they are now hosting that they definitely didn't ask for. And then the pile, which is seen, you know, this inverted triangle, it's like the pyramid pattern at the bottom of their sigil, is often seen in heraldry as something that was granted to like significant military leaders, or it was granted to those with great ability in construction. And now House Lefer was actually founded by an Andal warlord and a first woman bride. So it is possible that this pile is in reference to the military prowess of this Andal warlord, and that might explain where their sigil has come from. So the blue often symbolises loyalty and faith and strength, so we shall see about that. And the sun symbolises glory and brilliance, and I think that kind of perfectly sums up the Westerlands hubris, does it not? The Golden Tooth is very typical Westerlands looking. It's in between this kind of mountainous terrain. So their castle controls the main entrance to the Westerlands from the east due to its situation on the hill road. So like we were saying in the trailer video, it's kind of situated in this mountainous region that you can't really easily navigate around, and so it's also, you know, really important for trade and, you know, especially in war times for maneuvering your military. So it's essentially seen that in order to attack the Westerlands from the east, or to move from the Westerlands into the east, you essentially need to have the Golden Tooth on your side, or to give you approval so that you can have safe passage in this mountainous region. We also see that they have lions with them, and now this is very interesting, and God bless them for dedicating some of the CGI budget to this. It's interesting seeing that the Targaryens are pulling up with their dragons, the Lannisters are pulling up with their lions. I want to know, are we going to get some direwolves pulling up with the Starks? Please, Lord, let us, because God, I'm begging, I miss them so bad. Lions in antiquity would have had their dens around Casterly Rock, and so, you know, this symbol of their house was something that actually inhabited the region that they were operating in, and then later they would have been kept in the bowels of Casterly Rock in cages. And we see in the books, the Song of Ice and Fire books, that Jaime and Cersei actually go down and, you know, are kind of trying to tease each other into going in and like touching one of the lions, and Cersei does it but Jaime's too afraid. Obviously the Westerlands is based on like southern England, and the symbol of the lion is also on English heraldry and is symbolic of nobility and royalty and power and valour. And, you know, a lot of these things end up being emblematic of the Lannister family themselves. Also, it's notable that the Reigns of Castamere is playing in the background of this scene, and obviously that should not have been written for another 130-ish years, given that the events that, you know, eventually came to the song The Reigns of Castamere being made hadn't actually happened at this point in the story. But I will not complain because it is probably my favourite song off the entire Game of Thrones soundtrack. So the interaction with the Lannister forces and their decision to set up shop at the Golden Tooth is essentially based around the idea that Jason Lannister is refusing to go to Harrenhal without Aemond and his dragon coming to protect them, because obviously everybody wants a dragon to protect them now after they've heard about the absolute horror show that was Rook's Rest. So, you know, we see this with Jane Arryn, we see it with the Freys up at the twins, and we also see it with Jason Lannister, who pulls up to the Golden Tooth and says he's going to stay there until Aemond comes with Vhagar to escort them. And Aemond does not take lightly to this, so we see him in the next scene. He's in the Green Council, and he is absolutely enraged at the audacity of Jason Lannister. I know, Jason Lannister audacity, who would have thought, like, as if there wasn't enough of that in the first season. He should have known really what he was getting himself into. But he then comes into his Green Council, he's furious, he's giving off to everybody that, you know, he's the Prince Regent and not a dog to be called to heel. And, you know, part of this letter was supposed to be sent to Tywin Lannister, who is Jason's twin brother, who's on the Green Council, but we obviously see at the start of the scene that Aemond's the one reading it, and so we can only imagine how that went. So Aemond then essentially comes to the conclusion that Tywin Lannister is going to have to go and make some sort of deal with the Triarchy, because the Greyjoys have not responded to them. Ironrod is talking about the Greyjoys, how they haven't responded, and then essentially says, oh well, you know, we could maybe sweeten the deal for them by offering up a marriage with the Dowager Queen between her and the Red Kraken, who is Dalton Greyjoy, a 16-year-old tyrant who definitely does not respect women, and Alice needs to get as far away as she humanly can. She immediately shuts this down, and, you know, whenever Kristen Cole tries to suggest some alternatives, he's swiftly told that he's to go to Harrenhal with his men. And even though he says himself, if Daemon has been successful in the Riverlands, I do not have the army to come against him. And Aemond has absolutely no concern whatsoever. He's like, I'll fly out with Vhagar to meet you eventually when the time is right. So just a note on the Triarchy. The Triarchy is made up by Myr, Lys and Tyrosh. Seen Corlys battle with them in season 1 in the Battle for the Stepstones, because it's an essential trade route basically, and it is run by a council of 33 magisters, and this is broken up into like 11 magisters from each of the 3 free cities who make up the Triarchy. And so essentially he is saying that they need to contact them and allow them to deliberate on whether or not they're going to form some sort of alliance with them. After the council meeting, he calls his mother to stay back for a word, and he essentially dismisses her from her post on the small council. He's like, what purpose do you have being here? Which is very ironic, because he really had no purpose in being there. He didn't have a role in the small council, and the only reason that he was at any of the small council scenes before now, you know, before becoming the Prince Regent and Protector of the Realm, is because Aegon essentially was like, oh no, it's my brother, I want him there. And he actually had no official role, so he didn't really need to be there, which is ironic, because now he's calling out his mother for exactly that and dismissing her for exactly that. And he also dismisses her, saying that now she can pursue domestic matters, which is absolutely hilarious that he's going to come along and be misogynistic, given that the only reason that he has any power whatsoever and anybody sees him as formidable in any way, shape or form, and the only reason that his entire Green Council was shaking in their boots in that last scene, was because he rides the biggest dragon in the realm, who is a she-dragon. And so we get this scene with him and Alicent, and, you know, initially it shows this shot where you can actually see his other eye, and, you know, he actually looks like he's emotionally connecting. She reaches out and touches his face, and this is like the most interaction we've got from them since he was a child, since she became disgusted by his actions after the death of Luke. And, you know, it seems like for a split second it's almost a cathartic moment for him, and you can kind of see in this like look that he has towards her that there's almost love, that there's almost some sort of, you know, like she's breaking through. And then it switches to this shot where all you can see is the eye patch, and it kind of plays on this like this symbolic thing with a one eye. And, you know, in the official Game of Thrones podcast, they were talking to Ewan Mitchell, and he was talking about how there's these connections between, you know, Aemond and the Cyclops myth and the Homeric myth. The Cyclops was seen as like these uncivilized, cannibalistic, like farmers essentially. There's technically 3 versions, but the 2 main versions is this Homeric myth, and they're like these really grotesque, violent beings. And then there's the Hesiodic myth, in which the Cyclops were 3 sons that were to Gaia, who is like an earth goddess and a universal mother figure, and then Uranus, who is the personification of the skies and heaven and the air. And it's kind of like this idea of godlike imagery. It's almost like you can parallel, you know, Gaia being this universal mother figure to Alicent, who is often seen in this mother figure role. You know, the mother in the Faith of the Seven, she's often depicted in imagery of, you know, the maiden in Christian and Catholic mythologies and symbologies. We also see through Uranus this personification of the sky and heaven as being like the Targaryens, being masters of the sky, being dragon lords, and also having this connection to the heavens as in being these godlike figures and being seen as gods by those who are not dragon riders. So we kind of see that the unity of these two people. It's also notable that Uranus is considered to be Gaia's first son. And so it also hits that, you know, Targaryen ancest vibe too, if you want to look at it that way. But we do see the unity of these two to create the Cyclops as almost this unity of like, you know, Alicent and Viserys. These sons eventually, they're very skilled craftsmen. They eventually craft the lightning bolts that Zeus uses. And, you know, again, this fiery imagery, this Sky Lord, this feat of almighty strength and unbridled and unparalleled power also kind of relates to how like Aemond would see himself. But then we also have to look at it in terms of, you know, the idea of the one eye and how this shot and the framing of the shot changes the perspective of, you know, his tone, how he behaves, because then he, you know, goes up, he holds his mother's hand very briefly and then takes it off his face. It kind of shows this whole one eye demonstrating the advantage of eliminating distraction, and we can obviously see that he's very tunnel visioned and he's almost gone mad with power almost immediately. But at the same time we can kind of see that he's reckoning with the fact that maybe he's, you know, out of his depth a wee bit, but he uses this fear and the threat of violence to keep everyone in line and to try and get his way. So, you know, he has eliminated those distractions, but similarly he is tunnel visioned and there's a danger in that, and, you know, it creates this short-sightedness that again is reinforced by this one eye symbolism. Then we get this shot of Corlys, and he is in the Black Council now. He's back on Dragonstone and he's fixing his hand to the queen pin on, and suits him well. But of course in this Black Council scene he says not all, so didn't really help very much. But I think he's probably looking at the Black Council and looking at how utterly in chaos and disheveled it is. He's probably also looking at this idea that Rhaenyra is pitching to Sir Stephen Darkland, who is then presented to the council, and she explains that his grandmother's grandmother has Targaryen blood, that she was a Targaryen princess supposedly. So she's essentially saying you could try and ride one of the dragons who are currently riderless, but you have to accept that if you try this, that it is potentially fatal. And he does so, absolutely, and he is entirely devoted to her and says, I've sworn to, you know, be your knight, to protect you, and to essentially do anything that I must to further your cause. And so he agrees. And he also talks about, you know, again, this godlike imagery of I am but a man and the dragons are gods. Again, this reference to this biblical imagery, this fact that, you know, the people really do see the dragons and the dragon lords as above them. And with him saying this, it kind of foreshadows this idea that if you are to dismantle this notion that I am but a man and they are gods, you know, how am I supposed to control one of them? If he was to be successful, it dismantles the idea that he is just a man and they are gods. You know, like it essentially means we are on the same level because I can claim one of them. And so it's a very dangerous premise that they're setting. And then we're back with Daemon in Harrenhal. And he is, of course, still having his DMT visions, as people in the fandom have dubbed it. This time, he's in the throne room. We see him walking up to the Iron Throne. And this time, instead of young Rhaenyra, we have King Viserys, Paddy Considine, making a return to the franchise. And we love to see it because what a lovely man. I was not the biggest fan of Viserys, I will admit, after what he done to Aemma in scene 1. I understand. He's a good king. Best option that they had, except Rhaenys. Yeah, no, after that scene, like, you can't have that be my introduction to the character and have me really like or care about him all that much, as I do sympathize with his situation. But yeah, we see this Daemon and Viserys throne scene, and we have King Viserys reciting almost verbatim the air for a day speech to Daemon. Did you say it? Did you say air for a day? And Daemon's like, you can't still be mad about that. But of course he's going to be. And, we see at the start of this interaction, this dream sequence that he has with Viserys, that he's completely, not understanding of Viserys's position. He doesn't understand why he's still angry about that. But, by the end of the second scene that we have with them together, he realizes that, that's a wound that never heals. And the fact that he felt betrayed by his brother in that moment, cut even deeper. And that he has to reconcile with his brother through these dreams because he couldn't do it in life, because he was so short-sighted and selfish in his actions and his thoughts and in his words that, he created this chasm between them that he then spent the rest of his life acting like he was fighting with his brother, but in reality he was fighting with himself. What's also notable in this scene is that the first time that we got this speech, he was absolutely enraged and he was shouting at Daemon across the hall, and ended up, disinheriting him and, naming Rhaenyra as heir. But in this scene, we see him really visibly upset, and you could hear it in his voice. And by the end of it, he's crying. And I think this is the point where Daemon kind of realizes the hurt that he's caused, that it's not just that they're fighting, it's that he's caused hurt. And then we get this scene that's quite the bit of comedic relief following, that really emotional scene with the two brothers reuniting. At the end of the vision, he is beating the doors trying to get out because he can't really confront what he's done to his brother just yet. Jumps between the vision to real life. The door is opened by Simon Strong, and Daemon comes up and holds a knife to him. And I have not seen this man smile like this in this entire series, never mind season. The way he's smiling, laughing maniacally at this man holding the knife, he starts accusing him of, there's some sort of sorcery, this is not right, something's happening to me, is this your fault? He starts accusing him, are you still working with Larys or Rhaenyra herself? We really see this descent into paranoia. And even by the end of the episode, we see the paranoia that Rhaenyra is also experiencing. This couple just need to start replying to each other's letters. For the love of God, put us all out of our misery, stop getting us involved in your drama. So we even say at the end of the episode, like, Rhaenyra is sitting, she's saying that she, suspects that Daemon has defected her, essentially. And here we see this with Daemon, that, he thinks that whatever sorcery is being cast upon him is possibly the fault of Rhaenyra. And it's just so comedic, this whole scene, and the fact that the three sons are sitting at the table being absolutely useless, and then he walks off at the end like a stroppy teenager saying, and stop watching me, as if he wasn't the one beating on the door to get on above Daemon. He's not having a good time with these Harrenhal visions. But in the next scene, he tries to do something about that. So then we get Daemon trying to leave, and we see the beautiful shot, the aerial view of the Godswood at Harrenhal, and Caraxes is up, just lying around in the forest, which really makes me think, I wonder if he is getting cursed with visions as well, if he's sleeping in the Godswood. The poor boy, our poor boy Caraxes, what is happening to him? Anyway, so he clearly wants to leave too. This whole scene, he's just cooing in the background, being like, Daemon, stop talking to the witch, for God's sake. Daemon goes to try and leave, and Alys is standing in front of the weirwood with her eyes closed, and it's almost as if she is warging the barn owl, who then comes and lands on her arm. Only moments later in the scene, her previous reference that she is not a woman but a barn owl, cursed to live in the human form. And she turns around and she's like, what, were you going to leave without saying bye? How very dare you, after all I've done for you, all the visions that I've plagued you with, trying to get you to confront your own morality. And he claims that someone's been poisoning him. Then they have obviously this whole discussion about ambition, succession. He, is stating about Rhaenyra, she didn't even want it, she didn't want the crown. And Alys very rightly states, those who strive for it are least suited to wear it. Obviously we see that this is very true in at many points in the rest of the episode. The fact that Sir Stefan tries to claim the dragon, and by the end a little bit of ambition is showing, and Seasmoke rejects him and eventually goes and seeks someone out who has absolutely no intention of riding a dragon, but is really given no choice because Seasmoke hunts him down like he is a prey animal. Alys is trying to teach him this lesson that, you know, the thing that you coveted so much, the thing that, you know, you ruined your relationship with your brother over, you know, as you just seen in the last scene, was something that is not a prize to be won, it's a burden. Instead of following through with his plan of leaving, we see that he, you know, sits down with Alys, and it's a very, very stark difference from the last scene that we've seen him in. Like, obviously, he was pulling a knife on per Simon Strong, who did absolutely nothing to deserve it, that poor man. But whenever he's with Alys here, you know, it's like that last episode as well, he kind of seems to calm down, and he almost seems like a dog that's being made to heel, and he sits with her and speaks with her and reasons with her, and he actually asks her for counsel in dealing with the River Lords. She's like, oh, Daemon Targaryen, ask him for advice. He's like, not advice, counsel, which definitely is not advice. She recommends essentially that you will need to troop the Tullys, and he's already obviously made that relationship a bit difficult by, you know, looking to treat with Grover Tully, who would not come, and then telling Oscar Tully to kill his grandfather, which was maybe not the best move. Maybe he was acting on a bit of hurt because he was relating everything back to his brother. But he might be in a better headspace now to troop with these lords, hopefully. He's asking what he needs to do, and Alys tells him that he needs to do nothing, which is what we've seen basically everybody in a position of leadership be told in the past few episodes, that they need to sit and let everybody else move around the chessboard and do the work for them. And we see that pay off in a few scenes time. So 3 days later, the winds will shift. So then, of course, we get the scene in the dragon pit where we see Stefan Darkland be walked out by a host of dragon keepers who are singing the same song in High Valyrian that Daemon was singing, and the lyrics are as follows: fire breather, winged leader, but two heads to a third sing. From my voice the fires have spoken, and the price has been paid with blood magic. With words of flame, with clear eyes, to bind the three, to you I sing. As one we gather, and with three heads, we shall fly as we were destined, beautifully, freely. We see them singing the song that Daemon sung to Vermithor in season 1. We see them advance, and Sea Smoke decides to make an appearance, and they've taught Stefan some very limited commands in High Valyrian to try and communicate with the dragon, but he is absolutely scared to death, and he's very timid in these. And the female dragon keeper, you have to appear strong, you have to appear confident, or the dragon will not choose you. And so he goes up and he starts saying these commands in High Valyrian. Sea Smoke lowers himself as if he's going to let him get on his back, and when he tries to advance, Sea Smoke backs away, thinks this is hilarious. He denies him, and not only does he deny him, but he burns him to death in his armor where he stands. And one of the dragon keepers gets caught in this as well and pulls out this knife that we hear in an interview that Ryan Condal was given, that some dragon keeper lore, that they fashion these as ceremonial daggers, and they're obviously then used to end their lives in the instance that they are caught up in dragonfire, because it is a swifter and less painful death than burning alive, which is obviously an occupational hazard for some dragon keepers. And Rhaena really needs to start replenishing these Kingsguard, because who does she even have now? She has like 1 or 2. Shocking. But, you know, she's absolutely horrified. Again, she hasn't really seen the epitome of, I mean, she hasn't seen any of dragon warfare, and she hasn't really seen them go against people like this either, for the most part. So she's absolutely horrified, and she obviously feels a lot of guilt about this. So she's transfixed, watching the flames engulf the pair of them, and Jace has to grab her and pull her, like you see here in this photo where he's calling out to his mother. And you know what? Thank God for this scene, for making Jace be nice to his mother for 5 minutes and make him actually a bit more likeable. It was quite endearing, trying to save his mom. So then we get this scene with Corlys and Alan of Hull, and Corlys is essentially asking him to be his first mate on his ship, and they're planning to go off to Sharp Point as Lord Bar Emin, who's a member on Rhaenyra's council, wishes to send his nephew aboard as a boatswain. Sharp Point is the seat of House Bar Emin, and it's in the Crownlands. It's located just south of Driftmark, so you know it's easily accessible to there, and it's along the landmass shores of the gullet, so it's like attached to the land, it's not on one of the islands, and it's at the northern end of Massey's Hook, so you know it's kind of that extension around from King's Landing. And House Barrowman's sigil is a leaping blue swordfish on a Freddy silver on white. There we go, another wee sigil corner for you. We also see that in this scene Alan is very reluctant to accept this, and essentially only accepts this when Corlys says that it's an order. And then we get this very entertaining scene in the bar, where Ulf is there and he's getting served some bowl of common slop, and he's like, this is disgusting, and Diana's there and she's like, well, it's either that or fish, and he's like, well, that's all we have, obviously, because the only way they have access to food now because of the blockade is basically whatever they can get in the shore of Blackwater Bay. Sylvia essentially weighs in and is like, yeah, we're sitting here, we have nothing, and they're up there, you know, drinking and dining and feasting and merriment for new Prince Regent. And both of them are obviously in on Miss Arya's plan to sow some discord amongst the Smallfolk in this situation where they are in destitution. She's looking to take advantage of this and sow some discord in the capital to stir up some support for Team Black. We've seen Alinda Massey going and meeting with Diana in the last episode, and so that's obviously extended now to include Sylvia as well, because Sylvia also says in this scene, King Viserys, he never loved in like abstinence of things, but he would never indulge where we were without. And, you know, was essentially talking about how he was a much better ruler than these subsequent princes of his. Also that his true heir is outside the capital, that she is exiled, and you know, she wouldn't be saying something like this if she wasn't confident in the company that she was in. So it's very likely that Diana has heard this man spouting off about being a so-called Targaryen, and you know that he believes that Rhaenyra is the true heir because he's obviously said that in one of the previous episodes in the season. And it's like she knows that this man he's known around town and he has quite a big mouth, and so if she wants some news to spread, saying it in front of him is probably her best bet. And of course she knows none of this is true. Like, Aemond is the last person that's going to be having feasting and merriment in his name. Like, he can't even speak to his own Green Council for 2 seconds without losing the head at them. But she also suggests that they have bands of women from her brothel going in and they're feasting every night. But she also knows at this stage she's the only woman that he's lain with and has continued to lie with. And it's unclear if he's gone back to her after that whole scene before Rook's Rest, because he was a bit of a brat. If I was her, I wouldn't let him back. But obviously she knows that none of this is true, and she's just spreading this to try and incite some discord among the Smallfolk. And then we have this scene where Rhaenyra is being followed around, and this is obviously after the burning of Sir Stephen Darklyn, and her counsellor Bartimus Celtgar is following her around the halls of Dragonstone and is basically berating her with, you know, this is essentially your fault and I would have counselled you differently, even though he was one of the ones who were absolutely banging on for the past season that they need the dragons and they need dragon riders. And as soon as she actually tries to put this in practice, all of a sudden it's all her fault and everyone wants to blame her and absolutely rid themselves of any accountability of demanding it in the first place. But he's walking around after her saying, you know, Sea Smoke has fled and, you know, we've lost Sir Stefan, that he would have, you know, preferred if they had have contacted House Mutton, and that, you know, they could have tried to retake Rook's Rest, as if that's really the point at this stage. And Rhaenyra snaps and she turns around and she slaps him, which is very unprofessional. She says, I fear that it's my fault that you have forgotten to fear me. Yeah, we see this switch in her character where she goes from this more, you know, family focused figure who's concerned with being reserved and refraining from action, or, you know, acting on impulse, to obviously acting on impulse. And she kind of shifts her focus to the war planning. And also we see obviously at the end of this episode that she reclaims a bit of her sexuality. It's almost as if she switched roles with Alicent, who has now become more family focused in the losing of her power. But yeah, so we see obviously she is becoming a bit more like book Rhaenyra, and also a bit more like Visenya, who she was reading up about. She's starting to take a bit of the power back into her own hands. This is also followed by the scene that we got in all the trailers of her thrusting the sword. We still don't know who owns these swords, but possibly they're Stefan Darklyn's, and they were left over after his death. We don't know. But we get the scene of her thrusting the sword, and then, you know, Mysaria comes in, and Mysaria is updating her what they'd planned in King's Landing is still going ahead, and that it, you know, she reassures her of the success of that. And she also reassures her that the search for the dragon seeds is a good idea and the right direction to go. And then she turns around and she gestures towards the sword and says, you know, if I may, this is becoming of you. And for anybody who couldn't at the end of this episode sense the chemistry, I just need you to rewatch. I just need you to, because I was blushing. Do you know, like, we get this Green Council scene with Prince Aemond, and you can really see how barren his council is now. He's essentially sent away anybody that had any sort of disagreement with him. So, I mean, the Maester's away treating Aegon, but aside that, Kristen Cole has been sent to Harrenhal. We see Alicent has been sent away. The Lannister has to go and contact the Triarchy and try and establish some sort of connection with them. And so really it's just Aemond sitting here with Larys and with Ironrod. And that's it, in the entirety of a small council. So he's really silenced everyone and is really embracing this role of power a bit too much, to the point where he's just denying the council of anyone else. And we see this furthermore in, you know, Larys kind of being like, right, well, the city's kind of fallen into disruption a bit, and, you know, the people are starving, and we are going to see more discord if we don't address it. And so you probably need a new hand of the king. You know, Kristen Cole's not here. He was your brother's hand. Tries to do the same old trick. Oh, he was your brother's hand. You need a new one. You need a hand of the king. And it's appointed by you, and that serves your interests. And so Aemond kind of sets him up, and Larys is like, oh, it would be my honor. And then he's like, not you, and calls him a toad. And this is the funniest thing ever. Like, the comic relief that we got from this character, who's so brutal and so brooding and so ignorant and so bloodthirsty and so fierce, is just absolutely hilarious that we got this comic relief right in the middle of the scene, humbling Larys Strong on the small council. Amazing. And then he turns around and he's like, no, go contact my grandfather. So someone else is going to try and contact Otto, but we hear a lot in this episode that no one can seem to get through to him. And then I was kind of wonder why that is. Then the Maester comes in at the end of the scene and says that the king has woken. Not for long, but he has woken. So Aemond is like, oh, what great news. And he seems absolutely thrilled. He's not even trying to hide it. He blatantly is very unimpressed at this news. This is not the news that he wanted. So following this news, he goes to see his brother, who has now woken. And when I tell you this man is an emotional tyrant, he's an emotional terrorist. Like, actually, it's not even funny. Like, per Aegon wakes, and he has just had, like, all these bandages taken off his wound in this really grotesque scene, and he's just wincing in pain the whole time. And then his brother comes in, clears the room, so it's just those two. He wakes to see the man who essentially put him in this position, and then came and stole a seat of power. And he is absolutely horrified. He's like writhing in the bed, like moaning in pain. He's trying to get away. He's terrified. And his brother just comes down and is like, what do you remember? He's like, nothing. Just don't hurt me. Don't kill me. So we see this look of terror in his eyes. His brother's like, yeah, you better remember nothing. It was very silly of you to go up against melees. And then he, you know, kisses him in the head. He brings out the ball from the council scene and presses it into his chest as he leans down. And this whole time Aegon's just writhing in pain. He presses it down on the open wound as if to say, I'm the authority now. I need you to stay in pain and in this bed so that I can continue to do what I'm doing. And he ends up leaving the council ball there too. He has absolutely no regard for, you know, these standards and customs, despite the fact that he emphasized so much his studying of them. And then at the end of the scene, we see him jumping back, and Maester Orwyle comes in and is like, what in under God are you doing? And he's like, it's going to take a long time for my brother to recover. Essentially saying, you better keep him dosed up because I'm quite enjoying the seat of power. And Orwyle is just, he's sick and tired of these royals and their nonsense. So then we go to the Vale, and we get Bela and Joff, and they're walking around in the beautiful scenic countryside. And she's talking to him about how, you know, essentially it's their duty that he has to stay here with Taraxes and protect the Vale with this big, strong, scary dragon. And that she and their younger brothers have to go over to Pentos. Or, you know, that's the intention. she's walking around and is essentially begrudgingly saying, this is our duty and I don't want to do it, but that's what we have to do. He walks around and he's like, I must mother this poor little boy. And then they stumble upon this massive burn pile that's quite the grotesque sight, with these charred sheep scattered throughout it, as if a full herd has just been smoked by a dragon. And it zooms out to this absolutely colossal burn pile. It's clearly from an absolutely massive dragon. And she's looking in horror because she's like, who did this? I was not aware that there were any wild dragons out here. This is a bit of a game changer. It changes everything. So then she's sitting there with young Aegon and young Viserys, and she's looking kind of horrified. And of course we get baby Stormcloud in this, and it's the cutest thing ever. It literally made the whole episode for me. Anybody that doesn't like this episode, anybody that's rating it low, I want you to look at the face of this beautiful baby dragon and tell me that it's not a 10 out of 10. Tell me. Lie. Anyway, so we see her and she is talking to Jane Arryn, who comes in and informs her that Reggio is going to take on her and the twins, and they are more than welcome to come and stay with him in Pentos. And obviously he is looking at the idea of bringing 4 dragon eggs and a dragon to Pentos, and he's delighted. So, obviously he was putting on all of his wee shows whenever they were there the first time. Could you picture him doing these wee shows with this beautiful wee dragon? This beautiful baby. So she's having this conversation. She's like, oh, you don't look happy, Jane Arryn is saying. And Rhaena is like, you've misled me. There's clearly a dragon up here. And Jane reluctantly admits, yes, there is a dragon, and it's large and formidable, but it's wild. And this is obviously why they wanted a dragon, to protect the Vale. It wasn't anything to do with Vhagar, really. It was the fact that there's already a dragon there, and they have absolutely nothing to defend against it if it decides to turn on them. It's come this far because it's supposedly roaming to range for food, and if this food runs out, could be the castle next. But then it also brings up this idea, like, will we possibly see some sort of attempt to claim this dragon? Will this potentially prevent her from going to Pentos if she tries to stick around to claim a dragon? We don't know. And it's going to be interesting to see what happens with this storyline in the next 2 episodes. We get a scene between the Hull brothers. So we have Adam and Alan, and we see that Adam is saying to Alan, oh, you're just like him, like, he's trying to offer you everything, like, you can have everything, you could even have the Driftwood throne, and instead you sit here and you try and be humble and deny it all. And while they're having this conversation, Alan is just straight up shaving his Targaryen white hair. Don't know how his brother didn't get it, if he got it, but they made a point of showing this to us, if it wasn't already obvious enough that they are Corlys' sons. There we go, now we know. And then straight after this we go to Dragonstone, and we have a scene where there's this interaction between Jace and his mother, and he's talking to her about the fact that she struck Bard Celtigar. And it's also interesting that they didn't try and get the Celtigars to ride dragons, considering they also came from Valyria. He's kind of talking about, that might not have been the wisest move, and she's like, he's lucky I didn't take his tongue. Okay, Lara's, calm down. My god. So she's going real Visenya on everyone now. She's like officially at her breaking point. She's sick and tired of her council, just being neglectful to her role in the war and just trying to dictate to her. And she's officially, mentally taken over the war planning. Jace then says, we can marshal the Vale, we can marshal Maidenpool and all of our allies, but we still can't beat the armies of the Greens. We need Daemon. And she's like, I'm sick and tired of hearing this. She's like, Daemon, 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 like, can I have 5 minutes without the refrain of Daemon? And she's officially at the end of her line, not only with dealing with her council and her son, but also having people say that she needs Daemon, that she depends on him, and she wants to rebuke this because she also feels like he's abandoned her, and so she doesn't want to see that she can't do it without him. It's also interesting that they talk about Maidenpool being one of their allies, because, and they also talk about speaking with Lord Mutton earlier on in the episode, because as far as we know, that is one of the 4 main houses that came up and confronted Daemon and Harrenhal. And so they might not be able to rely on Maidenpool as they suspect that they can. Then at the end of the scene, Mysaria comes in, and she kind of breaks up this interaction between Jace and his mother that's getting a bit heated, and she tells Rhaenyra, our gift is ready. And Jace is like, what gift? And then he storms off. Then we learn what gift it is, but we see this man in King's Landing discover this boat, and it's filled with food and has the red dragon on black Targaryen banner hanging from it. I see him kind of look at it initially, and it's almost as if he's deciding whether he should just take it and not tell anyone, because there are some other people in the background. But then the camera pans up and we see that there's almost a whole fleet of these shipments coming in. These gestures to the Smallfolk that Rhaenyra is going to feed them, where the Greens have denied them, even though it's literally Rhaenyra doing the blockade. So then we get this scene with Alicent. We kind of have these two mother-son scenes going almost back to back. And within the scene, she is also talking to Grandmaster Orwyle, and he's talking about how Aegon is still mostly sleeping, 9 hours out of 10, and she's just kind of there looking to spend time with him. She asks, what will he be if he wakes? Which, is quite a derogatory way of asking what he'll be. He'll still be your son. He's still the King Aegon. Obviously, she's concerned about his condition and what it's going to be if he, fully regains consciousness, and the difficulty of his recovery on the road ahead. And she asks about, the success for letters to her father. Has he gotten back? And we learn that Otto has not returned any letters. This is almost immediately followed by the statement that the Beastburies have, rebelled essentially against the Hightowers because of the death of Lord Lyman Beastbury. Obviously at the hands of Criston Cole, the Hightowers once again suffering as a result of Criston Cole's actions. She's literally looking at her son in bed, covered in burn wounds because of, the war planning of Criston Cole. And then at the end of the scene, we see her holding her son's hand and saying, I'm sorry. And, we really get this emotive response from her, that now that she does not have this position of power, she really is kind of indulged in motherhood in this episode, with her interactions with Aemon, now with her interactions with Aegon, and then later with her trying to protect Helena in the food riot scenes. So after the scene with Alicent and Aegon, we move on to this scene with her speaking to her brother, and I think she's kind of harbouring this, guilt that she feels obviously from the previous scene and what's happened to her son, and the fact that she suspects her other son had something to do with it. And so she goes out and she's talking to her brother Gwayne before they leave on their way to Harrenhal, he and Cole and the army. She's saying about how she goes out because she wants to give her blessing, and then she asks if he has heard from Otto, because obviously, he still hasn't gotten back to her, and she just heard that from Maester Orwyle, so obviously it's going to be on her mind. And he's like, no, I mean, if he was going to get back to anyone, he would get back to you because you were always his favourite, which is funny, coming off the back of the Daemon and Alyssa Targaryen scene, and the whole you were always mother's favourite in season 1. So obviously we have this whole mild sibling rivalry going on here, and it's really interesting getting to see these two interact, because obviously she's grown up at court, he's grown up in the High Tower, and so these two obviously haven't spent very much of their life together, and obviously don't really know each other that well, but they end up having what I think will be my favourite scene in the whole episode, and they start talking about Daemon, her 4th child with King Viserys, and 3rd son, who is in Old Town and he is squiring for the Hightowers. She starts asking, what is Daemon like? What's my son Daemon like? We find out that they'd been corresponding with each other through writing, but that recently he's been writing less and less. Her brother Gwayne starts listing these things off, that he's clever, that he's a good swordsman, and that he's as good a lute player as he is a swordsman, and that, he has the fancy of all the young ladies. And then he kind of realizes what his sister's really asking him about, having just come off the back of, these things happening to her sons and the interactions they have and their nature, and the fact that she's going around and saying, what Aemon does to everyone. Like, she clearly is doubting her parent and capability and looking at the things that her sons have done, and she's horrified, and she just wants to hear that one of her children, one of her sons is not like that. And so he kind of understands what she is really asking, and the fact that she just came from Aegon's side. And this council scene with Aemond has been kind of an emotional roller coaster for her in terms of her relationship with her son, or with their sons. And so he turns around and he says, and he's kind. And she says that she's glad, and that kindness is a trait that she often found lacking in his brothers. And Gwayne is, trying to be supportive and trying to offer this feeling of comfort, or in that you know, the Red Keep is not the most salubrious of environments for young men to flourish, and is kind of trying to take some of this guilt and accountability off of her and place it in the environment, which I think also has a large part to play, and, you know, something that she might have not even considered, because obviously they've been surrounded in violence and entitlement, and her other son Daemon has not been. He's been a squire, he's been made to serve, and so has obviously been more humbled in the process. And then she starts to question whether it was the court or whether it was her as their mother, and Gwayne, being the most emotionally literate man on this show by the looks of things, turns around and says, "No, I'm sure you did your best." And it's really, really nice to see this sibling scene between the pair of them, and especially getting this just before he heads off too is very emotionally impactful. He is very much becoming a fan favourite of mine, I've got to admit. Freddie Fox, beautiful, entertaining man. But this character, this scene was so beautifully written, and getting to see it play out between these two was so, so endearing. So I'm really glad we get to see this scene from them. And just as they're about to leave, Cole, you know, smiles over at her, and she gives a smile too. But it's interesting to see that instead of, you know, where in the last scene she went straight to Cole and Gwayne was watching them, that she now goes and prioritises family, and Cole is watching on as they speak to each other. And then we get this scene on the streets of King's Landing where Hugh Hammer is down petting Cheese's dog. And you know what, I thought the scene was adorable, but the amount of people, including, right, I initially seen this from the Dragon Demands on Twitter. He was talking about how it's only a matter of time. It's not if, but when Hugh decides to eat this dog. And never once did that thought occur to me, because I'm not absolutely psychotic. Also, I'm vegan, if you couldn't tell by the look of me. No, that thought didn't even occur to me. I was absolutely horrified to even consider such a thought. But anyway, we get this beautiful shot of him petting the dog. Finally, this dog is getting petted and shown some affection by somebody. And we see somebody trying to run past, you know, they're holding a bag full of food. And Hugh's like, "Wait, where'd you get that?" And ends up hitting this man and taking his food. And all we see in the background is things starting to descend into anarchy. Rhaenyra and Miss Arya's plans obviously working. People have taken the red and black Targaryen banners and they're running through the city saying Rhaenyra cares about us even now. And it's very, very obvious that the tides are turning, and it took very, very little to do so when the population is so destitute. All you have to offer them is the bare minimum, and it's better than the conditions that they have currently, so they were more than ready to take it. Also, it's interesting how Hugh kind of went from, you know, the start of the season when his wife was talking about how, you know, you essentially have to do these things that are quite morally ambiguous to secure food and the well-being of your family. And he's like, "Oh no, like we would never do that." And now he's fully out here hitting boys for bags of lettuce. So we're starting to see the character changes and what this food shortage is doing to people's morality. So then we have the scene where Alicent is in the sept with Helaena. And there was an earlier scene too that I forgot to mention where she went into Helena's room and she was talking about how one of her crickets had stopped singing. And Alicent was like, "I want you to come and light candles for your brother/husband with me." A lot of people are debating the symbolism, if this is another premonition or prediction or some sort of dragon dream from Helaena. I think this is probably in reference to her brother, because I'm pretty sure that there was 3 cages of crickets, and if one of them stopped singing, it's probably because her brother's being silenced in this episode by their other brother. So hopefully we get some interaction in the next 2 episodes between Helaena and Aemond, because I need to see what's going down there. But anyway, that scene resulted in them going to the Great Sept to light a candle. The Kingsguard come in and say that they have to leave because discord is obviously rising in King's Landing, and so they go to leave and everything kind of descends into chaos outside. They're going down and trying to get into the wheelhouse. They throw fish at Alicent and call her the Queen of Fish, and God love Olivia Cook, it turns out they actually did this in the shot. She said she was okay with it, like, but horrifying again. So she goes down and one of the small folk go to reach for her and to put their hand on her, and one of the Kingsguard, one of Aegon's friends, cuts his arm off. Then, you know, Alicent immediately is like, "Everyone sheathe your swords." He doesn't want to descend into any further violence, but also she doesn't want the small folk to absolutely go ballistic after this, because obviously they would. And then, you know, they start chasing them down. They pin them up against this spiked railing, and it's very, very much contrasting the last time that these two were out in public together and everyone was against farming them. but doing so out of love and adoration and trying to deliver their condolences to the Queen Helena. They definitely do not have that sentiment any further. Also, can we please stop putting my girl Helena in positions like this? Every single time that she ends up in a position like this and she's left covering her ears or really distressed and she's literally on the floor of the wheelhouse at the end of this. I'm so sick and tired. Let my girl chill out. Then we have what might be one of the best scenes in the episode, and it's where, you know, we see Aegon and he is lying in his bed and he's reaching for milk of the poppy from one of the maidens that are in the room, and Larys comes in and he shoos her away and is like, no, he's not taking that. So she is dismissed, and obviously we know that he has basically replaced the whole servant staff in the Red Keep, and so obviously whatever he says goes, which is very interesting because obviously he was very deeply slighted by Aemond, who refused to make him hand and then called him a toad in the last scene that they shared together, and the fact that he controls most of the staff within the Red Keep might not end up being the best of ideas for Aemond, but I digress. So the handmaiden ends up leaving the room, and Larys sits down and starts talking to Aegon. He's like, listen, I understand the milk of the poppy, it dulls the pain, but it also lessens the mind, and you know, now that your body is in this state, your mind is your most powerful weapon, and so you really can't afford to do any harm on it. He states, you've already written yourself into legend, you survived Dragonfire, and so he's kind of like, you know, you don't need to go and do these massive feats of war, but you need to have your psychological function about you. Then he starts talking about, you know, you're never going to run again. He starts talking about his experience with disability and how it affected his life and affected his relationships. He talks about how when he was born, his father had accused a member of the household of basically casting some sort of spell upon him to twist his foot, and this is obviously in reference to Alys, so we know that Alys was at least of adult age when Larys was young. We do, you know, have the fact that this could be a possibility, and if it is it to be considered that the fact that she was clearly warging in the last scene that we had with her, and people have a lot of theories about him warging the rats, and that's how he kind of knows everything that's going on in the Red Keep. Could that be a direct result of Alys's so-called curse or spells upon him? And, you know, is that introducing again this idea of sacrifice? You know, Aemond had to lose an eye to get the biggest dragon in the realm, and you know, this whole idea of to gain magical power and all this, you know, unparalleled strength, you have to sacrifice something in the process, and was this some sort of sacrifice for him? And in exchange, Alys gave him this ability as a green seer or a warg, and you know, maybe he got some sort of magical intuition that way. Just something that I was thinking about whenever we were watching the episode. But obviously this also highlights the fact that his relationship with his father would have been very strained, in the fact that this was his father's first words about him essentially as soon as he was born, and so it kind of reframes this whole killing of his father and his brother in the first season. I mean, I do think that Harwin was collateral damage essentially, because he went back and was trying to save his father. I think the target really was his father. It's essentially all they needed to kill to get Otto back in. But obviously because he was mistreated by his father in this way, it kind of reframes that relationship that we had in our head, where we kind of thought of his father as, you know, more of a dignified man, and now that we hear this, we're like, oh no, maybe not, maybe he was actually quite disrespectful and derogatory towards his son, who was living with a disability in a realm that was not very forgiving to that and not very accommodating to that. He talks to Aegon about, you know, now that they have this kind of shared, because Aegon's leg is like completely shattered, is essentially what we've established, and you know, obviously with the whole statement, you'll never run again, he's essentially setting up that they have this commonality now between them. He talks about how they'll underestimate you and this will be your advantage, and again, I was kind of thinking about that in terms of like the whole having to sacrifice something to get this magical ability, like could that also tie into that? But again, that's just me hypothesizing. He talks about how Aemond is now ruling in Aegon's stead, and that this puts Aegon in danger because his brother clearly has a thirst for power and is ambitious and is very unpredictable and dangerous, and so, you know, he essentially needs Larys. Larys is making himself indispensable to Aegon, and you know, we're not really sure if this is truth or deception, but there's always some truth in the best deception. At the end of this, Aegon says, "Help me." And it's interesting because he makes this kind of face, he smiles down at Aegon, and the last time we seen him make that exact face, and now this is a quote from Joe Magician, so full credit, he states that the last time that we see Larys making this exact expression was when Alicent was looking for his help, and he then went and murdered his entire immediate family. So it's very clear that he will not draw the line at anything, that he'll go to any length to serve those that he is trying to get on with, that he is trying to forge some sort of connection with, that he will benefit from. And obviously there's no bigger connection that he can benefit from than that he can forge with the king. And so realistically he might stop at nothing to appease this plea for help from King Aegon. And I also think that this might result in some sort of ushering out from him to Prince Aemond, and essentially being like, yeah, you know, you need to go to Harrenhal. Obviously we know he's going to fly out eventually, but that might be his ushering out stage, and how he helps the king is by getting rid of his brother. Then we're back at Harrenhal, and Daemon gets part 2 of this Viserys dream, walking into this room, and you can see all like the rain still dropping down, like even though he is having this vision where he is in the Red Keep and he's witnessing Viserys crying over the body of Aemma and Balon. We can see that, you know, all his rain is still coming through. It's still very much set in Harrenhal, and even as in his vision he can't escape the surrounds of the place. And so he goes up, and his brother is mourning the love of his life and his firstborn son. Daemon finally, you know, after having seen his brother cry in these last 2 visions, it finally gets through to him. He goes up and starts trying to comfort his brother. He hugs him and he apologizes for, you know, the role that he played in his suffering at this time, and speaks of how he should have been here for his brother in his time of need when he lost the love of his life and he lost his firstborn son and heir, and instead he was out in the streets of King's Landing drinking in brothels with, you know, his gold cloaks, and essentially making jokes about this death and this absolute grievous loss that his brother had just suffered, that he would never really recover from. And again, that in doing so, Daemon permanently damaged this relationship with his brother that he never ended up fixing. This is really like a scene of realization for him, and he reaches out, he embraces his brother, he starts to do all the things that he knows that he should have done at the time, but was too prideful and, you know, looking for his brother's attention in all the wrong ways, when in reality he should have just been there emotionally and supportive for his brother. And so we see that, you know, in his recognition of the fact that Viserys needed him, it kind of begs the question, is he going to recognize that Rhaenyra, his wife, his children, and they need him to step up while they still live? And so, you know, instead of having this emotional chasm where he now realizes the things that he should have done in Viserys' life to mend that relationship with him, is he going to recognize that now in his relationships with his wife and children, and go and actively seek that out and act in their best interest and try and mend those relationships, where, you know, all of these visions that he's had previously at Harrenhal has made him confront the fact that he has been lacking in terms of being a husband and being a father. Is he going to now confront those things and try and redeem himself, try and mend those relationships, based on the fact that he now recognizes his wrongdoing in his relationship with Viserys, which was really the root of all of these issues that he had with, you know, all these other characters in the first place. We then see him wake from this vision, and again, it's just in Harrenhal, of course, and Simon Strong comes in and informs him that Grover Tully is dead. Daemon questions the manner of his passing, even though he was obviously a very sick man, and we obviously see skepticism with Daemon and sick men passing away anyway, sick men in a place of power, because we've seen the same kind of thing when Viserys passed away. He accused the Hightowers of interfering with him. As much as it wasn't necessarily true in that case, it is actually true in this case, because we learn Alys Rivers, their famed healer of Harrenhal, supposedly, went over and tried to assist him, but he ended up passing anyway. So obviously we know that Alys said, wait 3 days and the ones will change, because she was going to reward this emotional breakthrough that he had with facilitating the death of Grover Tully so that he could now treat with Oscar Tully. But given the fact that he kind of damaged that relationship, it's going to be interesting to see how it goes in the next episode when he's trying to mend it again, having just had this emotional realization. So then we get this scene with Alan of Hull, and he is again down at the beach. He's walking with his fishing equipment, and we see sea smoke off in the distance. And you know, we obviously seen this in the last couple episodes. Like, this is very normal to see sea smoke swooping around, and Adam is used to this. And then things take a slight turn. So sea smoke makes an absolute V-line for the coast and starts swooping down on the beach, and everyone is frantic trying to get out of the way, including Adam here. And it becomes very clear that sea smoke was chasing Adam. So Adam runs into this wooded area and tries to seek shelter from him. And then sea smoke does an absolute jump scare and lands right in front of him and comes up to him, and Adam looks horrified and that he's going to be the next person that sea smoke absolutely torches to a crisp. But then the scene cuts away, and obviously we do not hear of what happens until the end of the next scene. But yeah, no, I thought this scene was absolutely adorable. The way sea smoke was behaving after being, you know, a bit of a prankster and absolutely melting men. Then to see him chasing around Adam on this beach and through this forest and acting like an overexcited puppy was quite endearing. And then we get the final scene of the episode, and it starts off as a discussion between Rhaenyra and her advisor Mysaria, who is also now on her Black Council. And Rhaenyra is talking to Mysaria, and Mysaria says about how her banners were spotted being carried throughout the city. They only got so far and then they were stopped by the Greens, but that this is seen as a great success, you know, that their plan had worked. And as much as their other plans where they had listened to the war planning of men about sending dragons and using force, that they actually found more success in this, which was strategizing and using the dismay of the Smallfolk essentially to rally them behind her cause. We see Rhaenyra kind of still being concerned. She's talking about how she does not think that she can win, that her son is questioning her and her council's questioning her, and she fears that she needs Daemon, but that Daemon has defected from her cause and is now potentially championing his own and raising an army in his own name rather than hers. And then she starts kind of opening up about her past relationship with Daemon, and you know, also kind of with her gender identity and struggling with this, and how she always wanted to be him. She wanted to be carefree, dangerous, and that she wanted to be a man, and that he wanted everything that she had. So she had Viserys's love and adoration and was made his heir. And so the pair of them had this, you know, very, very conflicted, fiery passion for one another, but also this immense rivalry where they were both envious of each other. And that this kind of persisted and now has resulted in both of them being paranoid of each other's intentions. And obviously we've seen this earlier in the episode with him accusing that, you know, Rhaenyra herself had something to do with his visions. Obviously because he'd seen so much of Rhaenyra as well, it's not entirely out of the realm of possibility that he would think this, but realistically it's because of the amount of guilt and shame that he has regarding Rhaenyra and his treatment of her. And now we kind of see her exploring these similar themes. And so she's kind of talking about how they've potentially lost Daemon, they've potentially lost Caraxes with them, and potentially a Riverlands army, which is what they need to succeed in the war. She just is communicating that she feels alone. And Mysaria turns around and says, "You have me, you know, I believe in you, and I believe in your claim, and I believe in your capacity to rule." And she starts opening up about her history as well, which is not something that we've heard before or that she's expressed to any other characters, which is really highlighting this comfort between her and Rhaenyra, that she feels confident that she can share this. But she talks about her father and how her father had assaulted her and impregnated her and then left her for dead in the process of trying to terminate the pregnancy and potentially her life as well. But that she survived and she persisted and she made her way to King's Landing and she made a success of herself essentially. We also find out that she cannot bear children because of this, and so this makes, you know, Daemon's earlier claims in season 1 that she was carrying his child, it makes that even more of a slight, because obviously now we know her condition and that that's actually not possible for her and is definitely a sore point for her. Then she talks about, you know, her belief that Rhaenyra is steadfast, and so she believes in her claim and she'll stand with her, and the two of them share this really beautiful bonding experience where they're like propping each other up and reinforcing their belief in each other and encouraging each other, and essentially saying that as much as everyone else tries to go against us, and in the council, in the family, we have each other and we support each other and believe in each other. And after Rhaenyra hears this experience that Mysaria has been through and hears of her plight, she goes up and hugs her, and then the pair of them stay in this long embrace, and then it turns into a kiss between the pair of them. It seems like it could become more, but then they're interrupted by one of the very few remaining Queensguard, who come in and say sea smoke has been spotted flying around Spicetown. And Rhaenyra, after they've just broken away and she's trying to pretend nothing ever happened, she's like, yes, he is known to do that. They're like, yeah, no, supposedly he's a writer. And then they start questioning, Mysaria's like, who? And Rhaenyra starts getting concerned, it could be one of the Greens. Like, she leaves off in Cyrax and flies off. That's the end of the episode. She goes and is in pursuit of this dragon rider of sea smoke, who we obviously know is Adam of Hull, who sea smoke so eagerly claimed. I know a lot of people had issues with this episode specifically because of this kiss scene, and first and foremost, I think it made perfect sense. I sensed nothing but sexual tension from the pair of them this whole time, and given serious bisexual energy, and I don't know if maybe it's just because I'm a bisexual woman, I kind of seen this way earlier on and figured that it would probably not be paid off, because scenes like this usually never are, and usually are just kind of queer baiting. But here they actually paid it off, and it's nice to have that representation. I thought it was a really beautiful moment between the two. I do have a bit of an issue with this whole trope of, someone talking about sexual trauma and then it ended up being a sexualized encounter, but I don't think it was necessarily that sexualized between them. I think it was a genuine expression of, of this kind of adoration and support, and it kind of turned into like this intimate moment in terms of conversation that turned into an intimate expression of their appreciation for one another. I don't know, I think there's a lot that can be said about this scene. But earlier on, the scene with Jace, he's talking about how they need Daemon and his dragon, and she's Rhaenyra is exclaiming that she needs, even 1 hour without the constant refrain of Daemon, Daemon, Daemon. Before Mysaria appears and says that, the gift has been sent, and Jace straps off, feeling that he's been somewhat slighted for being left out of this plot. Rhaenyra is just after expressing her concern that Daemon might have defected her. She cites that she doesn't even see herself that she could be a ruler because her own son doesn't respect her as a ruler. And Mysaria is the only one out of her spouse, of her children, of her council, who really believes that she has the power to act on her own volition. And not only this, but she helps and facilitates her acting on her own volition that isn't just going straight for violence and war and use of dragons. Mysaria tells her exactly what she needs to hear in the scene, and she champions her even at her low points, when she's doubting herself, when she's doubting her ability to rule. Mysaria is her most effective counsel, and so far the actions of Daemon and her council have only led to failure and bloodshed, like we said, whereas her plan with Mysaria have been relatively successful. Obviously we see in this whole food riot scene, like, this has actually worked as perfect propaganda for her. Whereas whenever they went off to Rook's Rest, wasn't very successful. They haven't heard anything back from Harrenhal. So this whole time, instead of dictating to Rhaenyra and making demands for like everybody else in her life has, Mysaria has been offering informed insight and actual counsel, and then inviting her to collaborate in the planning and the implementation of these plans, and actually making her feel like a ruler rather than just dictating to her. And like she said, the others were treating her like she could be their, daughter before she would be their ruler. Like, at this point, Mysaria has also single-handedly forged, maintained, and solidified Rhaenyra's reputation and relationship with the Smallfolk, who, like Aegon said in episode 1, are key to the victory. She has done so efficiently that the Smallfolk have, completely turned sides, and they're supporting Rhaenyra. They're flying her banners in the town. They're talking about how Queen Rhaenyra cares about them even now. And it seems that they've completely forgot that the food shortage that they're currently experiencing and suffering under is the direct result of the Velaryon blockade at Rhaenyra's behest. And so this relationship that they forged has been super efficient, and obviously since the death of Rhaenys, she has been looking for a female confidant, and she has found that in Mysaria, she has found a female confidant, a female instructor, a female guide, someone that she can talk to, someone that she has also now facilitated a friendship with. And, you know, she has this bond with Mysaria that she does not have with her husband, with her children, with anyone on her council. And it really has turned into this whole, like, us against the world type of scenario. And I think it was a beautiful scene. And I think they had a lot of passion. I think it was probably the most passionate encounter kiss that we had in this whole season, this whole show. They really had this compassion for each other that was beyond just sexualization, but came from a place of love and understanding and openness with each other and being vulnerable to each other emotionally, and how that then lended itself to this kind of encounter. So I was a big supporter of it. But I am going to leave that there. So thank you so much for watching, and I know this is going to be a long one, so thank you so much if you made it this far. And I'm going to try and get the trailer video out ASAP. I was going to try and do it today, but I've clearly ran out of time. So thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.